In 260 AD, Roman Emperor Valerian was captured by the Sasanian Persians in battle. Odenathus, a prominent Syrian aristocrat, made himself king of the city of Palmyra. He raised an army of Palmyrenes and Syrians to defend the Roman East from the Persian army of Shepar-I, defeating them in a battle near Euphrates River. Odenathus spent the remainder of his reign fighting the Persians, receiving the title Governor of the East from Rome, ruling Syria as an imperial representative for Emperor Gallienus. Odenathus even declared himself King of Kings, the title used by Persian rulers to directly challenge the authority of Persians in the East. Unfortunately, he was assassinated in 267 AD, his 10-year-old son Vabalithus inheriting his throne, under the regency of Odenathus' widow, Queen Zenobia. The next year, Emperor Gallienus was assassinated and a period of chaotic succession engulfed Rome. In 270 AD, as barbarian armies invaded Rome's northern frontier, Queen Zenobia rapidly sent Palmyrene armies to conquer the Roman East, quickly subduing Egypt and part of Anatolia. While doing this, she continued to nominally recognize the authority of the Roman Empire, gaining power without openly challenging the Roman Empire. In 271, Queen Zenobia claimed the imperial title for both herself and her son Vabalithus, finally disputing the legitimacy of Roman Emperor Aurelian, whose portrait was removed from Palmyrene coins minted in Antioch and Alexandria in 272 AD, with Vabalithus openly using the title Augustus. Aurelian decided the Palmyrenes must finally be defeated, invading their Anatolian territory in 272 and winning 2 victories in Syria before capturing Zenobia and her children, ending the Palmyrene Empire forever. In this video, we will ask the question, what if the Palmyrene Empire survived, and how significantly would it change the history of the world? Firstly, how could we change the outcome of Aurelian's war against the Palmyrenes? Well, during his campaign in Anatolia, the city of Tyana was besieged by Aurelian's army, with the emperor promising his men they could loot the city, as they had done to every other city up to that point. In real history, once the siege ended, Aurelian decided to be merciful and spare the city from being sacked. This almost led to a mutiny in his army, and seems the obvious choice for a point of divergence from our real history. In this alternate timeline, the soldiers and/or officers in Aurelian's army are so disappointed by the order to be merciful to the city of Tyana that they assassinate the emperor. Such political instability and backstabbing was common during the crisis of the 3rd century, and Aurelian was eventually assassinated in real history anyway. Here, it would happen slightly earlier due to the seeming betrayal of his loyal soldiers. In the aftermath of Aurelian's death, the army would choose a new emperor from amongst itself to continue the campaign against the rich lands of the Palmyrene Empire. This new emperor would likely be chosen based on popularity amongst the army and willingness to allow plundering of every city the soldiers would conquer, advancing into Syria to take the rich city of Antioch. Discipline would likely break down in the army due to its poor leadership, and the new emperor would not be as tactical as Aurelian, who recognized approaching Antioch directly from the north would lead to a battle on terrain that favored the heavy cavalry of the Palmyrenes. This new emperor would not be the master tactician that Aurelian was, and would likely fall into this trap by the Palmyrenes, given that Aurelian nearly lost his final battle against the Palmyrenes due to the Palmyrene cavalry's superiority to his own. It fares almost impossible that this alternate emperor would fare anywhere near as well. The Roman army would likely be encircled by the Palmyrenes' heavy cavalry, led by Empress Sembonia's top general, Zabdis, and destroyed almost entirely. Aurelian's successor would likely be killed in the fighting or captured and executed after being paraded around Antioch. The remnants of Aurelian's campaign army would flee back into Anatolia, allowing the Senate to choose the next emperor as they had done out of guilt in real history when Aurelian was assassinated. Meanwhile, the army of Probus would have arrived in Egypt as part of Aurelian's 2-pronged invasion plan, only to hear the death of their emperor and the subsequent catastrophic defeat of the Roman army outside of Antioch. Even if Probus's army conquers Alexandria as they did in real history, it would only be a brief occupation, with Palmyrene forces soon pushing out demoralized Romans from Egypt altogether with reinforcements from Syria. The Senate in Rome would likely choose the same man who succeeded Aurelian in real history as the new emperor. Marcus Claudius Tacitus. Tacitus was the princeps senatus during this time, making him the longest-serving or most senior senator. Additionally, he had served as consul when Valerian was emperor and had been chosen as consul for the year 273 AD already. Therefore, Tacitus would be selected in late 272 to become emperor, around 3 years before he did in real history. Aurelian would still be deified for his victories against the Vandals, Juthungi and Alemanni, with Aurelian being remembered in a similar light to his predecessor, Claudius Gothicus, rather than the restorer of the world. The first problem for Tacitus to deal with would be Empress Zenobia cutting off grain supplies from Egypt to Rome. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, part of the reason why Aurelian had sent a separate army under Probus to conquer as part of his invasion plan. The grain of Egypt was essential for keeping Rome's huge population fed and content. It is unlikely that Tacitus would seek to continue the war, as allowing the capital city to suffer from starvation would not exactly make him very popular with the ordinary people of Rome. Feeding his army for the duration of the campaign would also be difficult. Additionally, Tacitus is described as an older man in contemporary sources, making him less suitable for a large-scale campaign against the Palmyrenes. The death of both Roman emperors who attempted to conquer the Palmyrenes would also make the idea less appealing to Tacitus. Tacitus would therefore recognize the legitimacy of Vabalithus, Zenobia's son, as co-emperor, in exchange for the return of grain shipments to Rome. This may only be a temporary measure for Tacitus to secure his position as emperor and stabilize the empire before any reconquest, or a genuine long-term solution to defend the empire. Either way, Zenobia would accept to prevent a long war and easily retake the Palmyrene land in Anatolia. If any of the assassins of Aurelian remained alive, they would likely be executed by the emperor upon their return to Roman land, avenging the murder of Aurelian and trying to disincentivize the constant political assassinations of 3rd century Rome. Amongst the highest concerns of the new emperor was the restoration of the ancient senatorial powers. Just as in real history, Tacitus would grant substantial powers to the Senate, securing to them by law the appointment of the emperor, the consuls, and the provincial governors. All these reforms were undone by Diocletian in real history, but here they may last longer or be modified rather than entirely replaced. Strongman military emperors like Aurelian would be less popular due to their lack of success in keeping the empire together, making the idea of senatorial power more appealing in this alternate timeline, at least for now. In 273, Tacitus would lead the Roman army against an incursion by the Carpi into Moesia and Thrace, defeating them personally to increase his popularity. The Aurelian walls in Rome would likely still be completed, but they may be known as the Tacitus walls instead, as he would have overseen most of the construction in this alternate timeline. However, Aurelian's currency reforms after 272 would never come into effect, meaning the denarius would be retained for longer and hyperinflation would likely not occur. The year 275 would see barbarian tribes like the Franks invade Gaul, exploiting the reincorporation of the Gallic Empire by Rome. Tacitus would likely send his half-brother, Florianus, to restore order in Gaul. Around the same time, the Goths would invade across the Danube, provoking Tacitus into leading his own army to Thrace. Empress Zenobia, fearing an imminent invasion by the large army approaching Asia Minor, would probably cut off grain shipments to Rome again. The confrontation would lead to Tacitus crossing into Anatolia with his army in 276 AD, seeking to finally reunite the whole empire. However, unlike during Aurelian's campaign, the Anatolian cities in Galatia would likely resist the Roman invasion, fearing retribution by Empress Zenobia if the Romans were to lose a second time. This would lead to the campaign stalling, especially since Tacitus was no military genius. Due to a summer heatwave in 276, many of the Roman troops unaccustomed to Anatolia's hot climate would fall ill. This would allow the Palmyrenes, led by General Zabdas, to weaken the morale of the army by raiding around the Roman camp with his heavy cavalry. The struggling troops seeking an end to their terrible condition may rise up and kill Tacitus. Or, alternatively, Tacitus may die from the heat wave or a military encounter. The Roman Senate, aware of Florianus, Tacitus's half-brother, leading an army in Gaul, would select him as the next emperor. Probus, unlike in real history, would not have the power or influence to lead a rebellion against Florianus. Florianus, trying to focus on securing the Rhine frontier, would order the remaining troops of Tacitus' army to retreat from Anatolia to Greece. In the same year of 276, Bahram I of Persia would die, succeeded by Bahram II, his brother, Hormizd, who governed the eastern provinces of Persia, would rebel as he did in real history, forming the Cassano-Sasanian kingdom. Bahram II would also face the revolt of his cousin in Sakistan, leading to complete chaos in Persia. In 277, Florianus would travel to Thrace to take command of his deceased half-brother's campaign army's remnants. He would defeat the Goths, sending them back across the Danube, but would likely not pursue another campaign against Zenobia, as several emperors would have failed to restore the Roman Empire to its original borders. Instead, he would likely grant Zenobia and Vabalithus full control over the Roman East, including all of Anatolia, Cyprus, and Cyrenaica. In exchange, the Palmyrenes would agree to continue to supply vast quantities of grain to Rome for cheap prices, hoping to achieve good relations between Rome and Palmyra, which would become a Proto-Byzantine empire without the Balkans. As King Vabalithus becomes an adult, the Palmyrene Empire would be at its greatest extent. Zenobia's court would be the center of learning, with many intellectuals influencing the Palmyrene Empire's governance, such as Necrostolos of Trapezus and Callinicus of Petra. Zenobia's chief counselor, a philosopher named Calsius Longinus, would advise Emperor Vabalithus as he reaches maturity and begins to rule his own right. The Palmyrenes would root out piracy in Lycia while prospering from the tax revenue of Egypt, Anatolia, and Syria. In Rome, Florianus would likely be assassinated due to the unpopularity of giving away Roman lands, but this was typical in 3rd century Rome. Constant barbarian invasions would prevent another invasion into the Palmyrene Empire, while Bahram II would be fighting his brother's kingdom in eastern Persia. Emperor Vabalithus would invade Mesopotamia, guided by General Zabdaz, conquering the region as easily as Roman Emperor Carus at the same time in real history. The great cities of Babylon and Seleucia would be garrisoned by Palmyrenes, treated as liberators by many natives who resented the Persian imposition of Zoroastrianism, which had recently led to prosecutions against religious minorities like Massacheists. The Palmyrene Empire would be a religiously tolerant society, a blend of Arab paganism, Roman paganism, early Christianity, and now Zoroastrianism, as well as many other minor religions. Soon after the Palmyrene conquest of Mesopotamia, they would install a vassal king in Armenia, securing the Palmyrene north. At some point during the 280s, Diocletian would likely still rise to the position of emperor in Rome, due to his long-term planning and popularity amongst the army in real history. He would recognize the inability of one emperor to defend both the Rhine frontier and the Danube frontier simultaneously. A form of the tetrarchy system would still be developed, but much less consequential, with only 2 Caesars being appointed to defend Rome's northern borders. One Caesar would rule in Gaul and Britannia, while the other Caesar would rule in Greece and Thrace. Rome would likely still face usurpers, with Britannia as the ideal location for ambitious generals launching rebellions due to its distance from imperial authority. Usurpers like Carausius would likely still attempt to invade Gaul, but be defeated due to the more stable rule of Diocletian. Diocletian would still centralize power with himself and the position of emperor as he did in real history, with the autocracy of the Palmyreans serving as an example of stability and prosperity to the Romans. Diocletian's reforms would include separating military and administrative offices, reorganizing provinces, and supporting the first codifications of Roman law. When Bahram II returns from eastern Persia, he would likely attempt to take back Mesopotamia from the Palmyrenes, but the Zagros Mountains would serve as a buffer between the Palmyrene and Persian empires, with many of the Mesopotamian natives gladly fighting for the Palmyrenes against the former Persian overlords. Diocletian would not wish to invade the Palmyrene Empire at their greatest extent, recognizing how failure in campaign could undo all the successes of his reforms. The Palmyrenes would have to put down rebellions in Upper Egypt against Palmyra's central authority, but would be victorious under the stable leadership of Emperor Vabalithus and skilled Eastern generals. The Palmyrene Empire would become a fusion of Roman and Persian culture. The best traditions of both merged into one system of government. Armenian and Mesopotamian recruits would help Vabalithus to defeat any invasions by Persia, leading to Sasanian control completely eroding in eastern regions like the Punjab and Bactria. In this alternate timeline, revolts against Diocletian's tax reforms and other policies would happen in western provinces, likely at the same point in North Africa, which also helped to feed Rome. However, Diocletian would be able to put down any rebellions due to his centralization of power in himself as the emperor. One key difference from real history would be that Diocletian's persecution of Christians is likely far harsher, blaming them for the breakaway of the Palmyrene Empire. Christians would be expelled from the Roman army, with many devout Christians fleeing to Palmyra for protection and others acting as Roman pagans to avoid harsh punishment. In the early 300s, Diocletian would retire and Zenobia would finally die from old age. The efforts of King Vabalithus would lead to the northern Arabs, such as the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids, becoming vassals of Palmyra. It is likely a figure similar to Constantine and would soon become emperor, uniting the three regions of the empire back into one. However, there would be no incentive to convert to Christianity, as Christians would only be a significant minority in the Palmyrene Empire. When Vabalithus dies in the 320s AD, Palmyra would be at the peak of its wealth and power, with territory stretching from Mesopotamia to Egypt. In this alternate timeline, Vabalithus' son and successor may convert to Christianity due to its growing influence in the eastern regions of the Roman Empire during this time. However, Palmyra would remain a tolerant society where people of many religions can live together. The first half of the 4th century would mostly see internal reforms from Rome, bringing barbarians into the army to make up for manpower lost by the Palmyrene secession, as well as continued war against usurpers and barbarian invasions across the Rhine and Danube. It is probable that an emperor like Julian the Apostate would come along, leading a revival of ancient Roman values and the Roman religion, though the latter would be less impactful in a world where the Roman Empire did not become Christian. This emperor would seek to revive the glorious era of Augustus Caesar in Rome, and have ambitions to reconquer the Palmyrene Empire, similar to Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia 6 centuries prior. At the same time, Palmyra would be facing internal instability, with usurpers in Egypt and Mesopotamia challenging the central authority of Palmyra. Exploiting this chaos, Emperor Flavius Claudius Julius would invade Asia Minor, retaking the land with relative ease and moving on to the rest of Anatolia. By this point, the civil war in Palmyra would likely have ended, with one brother or cousin becoming emperor of Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia, and assembling their army to resist the Roman invasion, much like how Julian died in real history. The same would happen in this alternate timeline, with the Roman emperor being killed in an ambush by the Palmyrene heavy cavalry, possibly led by an emperor Vabalithus III. The Palmyrenes would move further away from Roman influence on their culture, being more inspired by the Hellenistic traditions of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties. It was a commonly held belief in Roman Hellenist East that the culture of the ancient Greeks had been copied from the Syrians, which would mean the Palmyreans have no interest in taking the real province of Greece, especially due to the constant barbarian raids into the area, making it costly to defend. The Palmyreans may have to fight back against a resurgent Persian dynasty, likely a new dynasty due to the failures of the Sassanids, but the Palmyreans would win quite easily due to their wealth. The Palmyrene wealth would mean that the Roman Empire did not have the funds necessary to pay off the barbarians instead of fighting them, being forced to eventually allow some tribes to settle in their lands as the Huns migrate from the east, pushing Germanic tribes across the Roman borders. Overwhelming Roman defenses. The Goths would likely settle in Thrace and Moesia, while the Franks would settle in northeast Gaul. These tribes would inherit the stable governance structures of Rome and remain vassals in name, contributing manpower to the Roman army. Eventually, the Romans would be forced to retreat from Britannia, to redirect the controlling unruly Germanic vassals, which would continue to acquire more land, with barbarian raids of wealthy provinces like Greece, Gaul, and northern Italy becoming more common, As the Huns grow in power and the Germanic tribes continue to settle Roman land, the city of Rome would inevitably be sacked at some point, signaling the decline of Roman power and the increasing autonomy of the Germanic tribes, which would control vast swaths of land previously ruled directly by Rome. Meanwhile, the wealthy and powerful Palmyrene Empire would remain in the east, blending Roman governance with Persian autocracy, united by a common history of Hellenistic rule. For now, Palmyra would remain stable, while the ancient empire of Rome would slowly begin to crumble away. It seems certain that the Palmyrians would begin a Christian empire eventually, building up the city of Palmyra as a new Rome, rather than Constantinople. However, we can't know what would have happened so far after our point of divergence. Thank you for watching. If you would like a part 2 to this video where we examine a possible future for the alternate timeline, please let us know. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Everything helps, and we aim to bring your alternate history ideas to life. You can support us by joining our Discord in the description of this video. This has been Divergent History. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.